Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking a seriously fascinating document. It literally maps out how the public affairs industry is completely flipping its approach to political influence. We're looking at a proposal from a platform called MapSite, and it's a deep dive into the nuts and bolts of what they call audience-led public affairs. So, if you've ever found yourself wondering how modern campaigns actually move the needle on policy in the real world, well, you're in the exact right place. Let's get into it.
Let's kick things off with a pretty massive question, one that really gets to the heart of our modern political landscape. How do you actually influence a politician today? I mean, historically, we all know the drill, right? It was almost always about that quiet word in a hallway, maybe a fancy private lunch, or a strategically placed media piece. But technology has totally changed the toolkit. Think about it. What if you didn't need that smoky backroom at all? What if you could just bypass it entirely?
Section 1. The traditional lobbying problem.
So traditionally, advisory firms are absolutely brilliant at policy strategy. They know stakeholder engagement. They can craft a beautiful narrative. But this whole method has a massive bottleneck. Why? Because it relies heavily on intermediaries. Basically, your perfectly crafted message relies entirely on some media outlet actually deciding to pick it up. Your whole lobbying effort depends completely on whether you can secure access to the right political offices. And honestly, the biggest vulnerability here is that public sentiment is mostly just guessed at through polls. It's inferred, not actively harnessed. So influence in this old model is incredibly indirect. It's kind of constrained.
But here's where things get really interesting. The industry is actively moving away from that old reliance on access and guesswork. We're literally watching a shift from influence by conversation, government relationships and media narratives, to a totally new model of direct, large-scale audience activation. It's all about taking the narrative directly to the people on the ground and empowering them to be the messengers.
Which brings us to Section 2, the MapSite shift.
The absolute crucial point here is this major pivot to what's called audience-led influence. The document defines this as the ability to identify, reach, and mobilize real-world audiences to actually create political outcomes. We aren't just crossing our fingers and hoping a politician happens to read a specific op-ed with their morning coffee anymore. Nope. We are deliberately activating the exact citizens who actually vote for that specific politician.
Section 3. How MapSite works.
So how does this actually work under the hood? Well, it builds through a highly sophisticated three-step mechanical process: audience identification, constituency mapping, and audience activation. Let's break each of these down because, honestly, the sheer sophistication here is what makes this whole thing so incredibly effective.
Okay, step 1 is audience identification at scale. And this completely moves past static assumptions or just broad, generic demographic guessing. Instead, it relies on real-world behavioral data. For example, instead of just targeting people who say they care about healthcare in some random survey, MapSite identifies the physical audiences, the actual people visiting hospitals and healthcare facilities right now. Or, say it's a hospitality issue, it identifies the folks actively walking into pubs, clubs, and retail shops. You are targeting a highly relevant group based on their actual footprint in the physical world. Pretty wild, right?
Then we hit step 2, constituency mapping. This is where the strategy really crystallizes. Because, let's be real, having a list of pub-goers is totally useless to a politician unless it actually impacts their job. So MapSite takes all that geographic and behavioral data from step 1 and maps it directly onto political boundaries. It overlays the data with specific electorates, specific members of parliament, and specific policy regions. Suddenly, boom, you have crystal clear visibility. You don't just know there are upset consumers out there. You know exactly which MPs are most exposed to those specific mobilized audiences right in their own backyards.
Finally, we get to the really dynamic part. This is where the switch gets flipped: audience activation. The system uses digital channels, we're talking social media, mobile advertising, sometimes even SMS, to communicate directly with these identified and mapped audiences, and it does it at massive scale. Plus, it's not just a one-off mailer that goes straight in the trash. Because it's digital, the messaging can adapt dynamically. As new people visit those pubs or hospitals, they automatically enter the dataset. It literally turns static, boring research into a constantly updating live influence campaign.
Section 4. Real-world activation scenario.
To really wrap our heads around this, let's imagine a scenario. Say a new regulatory change is proposed by the government that would negatively impact the hospitality industry. Maybe it's stricter operating hours, or maybe a new tax on venues.
Now, in the old traditional approach, an industry group would just lobby some MPs, maybe issue a few media statements, and kind of just hope for the best. MapSite's approach completely flips the script. First, utilizing that real-world behavioral data we just talked about, they identify over 3 million actual consumers who frequent these exact impacted venues. 3 million people. And they map every single one of them directly to the specific electorates of the politicians who are proposing the change.
Then, the platform activates. It delivers highly targeted, geographically localized messaging directly to the digital devices of those 3 million individuals. So ads pop up right on their social feeds telling them exactly what's at stake for their favorite local venue, and it prompts them with a very clear, immediate call to action. Contact your local MP or respond to proposed changes.
And the result of all this localized activation? It is massive, direct constituent pressure. Suddenly, targeted politicians aren't just hearing from one paid lobbyist in a suit. Their phone lines are ringing off the hook, their inboxes are completely overflowing, and their social media mentions are spiking. And it's all coming directly from the everyday people who literally hold the power to vote them out of office. It's localized pressure, hitting them all at the exact same time. There's just no ignoring that.
Section 5. The New Public Affairs Stack.
Now, what's really fascinating here is that MapSite isn't actually trying to replace traditional PR experts. Traditional firms still handle Step 1, the strategy, and Step 2, the messaging. MapSite simply acts as a brand new insert into the process. It injects this highly technical activation layer directly before the ultimate goal, which of course is the political outcome.
Basically, it operates on a partnership model. The advisory firms retain the client relationship, they build out the overarching narrative, and they design the strategy. Meanwhile, MapSite acts as the engine room. They provide the raw audience data, the targeting infrastructure, and the digital activation capability. By merging these two together, they offer a complete end-to-end influence solution. It elevates the advisory firm from just offering good advice to actually offering measurable, scalable impact.
And this brings us to a really key insight that's driving this entire industry shift. Influence is strongest when it is local, visible, and scaled. Think about it. Politicians respond to votes. They respond to public pressure from their own constituents. By making that pressure local to their district, highly visible in their daily feedback, and scaled to thousands of voters, the influence becomes absolutely impossible to ignore.
The source material concludes with this powerful thought, and it perfectly summarizes everything we've looked at today. Public affairs is evolving from influence by conversation to influence by mobilization. The days of relying solely on a quiet conversation in a corridor are definitely fading. The new currency of political influence is the ability to mobilize the masses at the push of a button.
I want to leave you all with one final thought. Now that you understand the mechanics of how behavioral data and targeted mapping are being used to drive real political outcomes, ask yourself, what does this shift actually mean for the future of democracy? The next time you are scrolling on your phone and you see a highly specific, localized digital call to action about a political issue in your neighborhood, well, you'll know exactly the machinery working behind the screen. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.